Hi. First of all, if the sound is too loud or too quiet, let me know. Sounds a little weird to me anyway. Also, I don't know if I'm going to go over or under, and if I go under, it's because when I get excited, I talk really fast, bzz, 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 like a deranged hummingbird, and that might be what happens, so yell at me to slow down if you have to. And if I go over, Brett's welcome to tackle me. That'd be totally cool and really funny, actually, so feel free. We're going to talk about negotiation today. I used to be a lawyer. Technically, I'm actually still an attorney, but I am not your attorney, and this is not legal advice. It's really important. Back when I was an attorney, I used to dress like this. Nowadays, I get to dress like this, so I'm much happier. So life has improved dramatically. So we're going to talk about, like I said, negotiation. First big thing I really want you to take out of this is all offers are negotiable. You will almost never encounter an offer that's take it or leave it. You can say yes, you can say no, nothing else. That doesn't happen in the professional world. You are expected to negotiate business deals. And of course, I'm only talking about America. I can't talk about other cultures. These things do vary. But here in the US, you can always, always, always negotiate. And you need to understand that and internalize that. Also, I know I promised I would talk about a whole different set of kinds of negotiations, but I had to cut a really, really long talk down into 30 minutes, so we're mostly going to be talking about employment agreements and raises, but a lot of the stuff that we're going to address you can use in any kind of negotiation in your life. That's kind of awesome. I got married under the Manhattan Bridge, and every once in a while we had to pause the ceremony for the trains to pass, and my husband actually vowed to wait for the train to pass. So that reminds me of that. Best wedding vow. I decided it's a metaphor for everything I need him to do in the rest of his life. So fear. Every talk about negotiation is a talk about fear. We are terrified of asking for what we want. I mean, I am, and I've been doing it for years and years, and I have professional training in asking for what I want, and it still scares the shit out of me. We're scared that people are going to think, oh my god, this person's so greedy or delusional or whatever, or, I mean, it's just this big ugh field. I don't want to deal with this. I want conflict. I mean, I just want to code. That's what I'm here for. Give me a computer and leave me alone. And the biggest fear that I think a lot of us have is, what if we get a perfectly decent offer that we would take, but we try asking for more to see what happens, and they pull it out from under us. And they think this person is so greedy and delusional, they dare to ask for, an extra $5,000 or something. I don't want to put up with this person anymore. This is not a realistic fear. This basically never happens. And I know that it's the boogeyman in the closet, and I've been advising people to negotiations forever and dealing with it on my own, and this is just not something you have to worry about. When you're dealing with professionals, professionals expect you to negotiate. You are a professional. That said, once in a while, you will in fact be dealing with someone who is not really a professional, and they will pull this bullshit. And if they do, you are grateful. You are the luckiest bastard on the planet. You walk out of there, you did not get trapped into a really ugly situation. This actually did happen to me once, back in my lawyering days. I applied for a job with a small law firm, and they made me an offer, and I asked if we could increase it by, I think it really was about $5,000, and no, they didn't call me back. About a week later, I called to follow up, and the secretary picked up, and she said, oh, lawyer's out of town. We already hired someone else. And I was like, wait, what? You made me an offer. I thought we were just wibbling over the details. But no, they were those crazies. The best part is, fast forward a year, I actually met the woman that they hired instead of me. She was looking for a job because she had spent the past year living a fucking nightmare. They had been abusing her, they had been overworking her, they had been underpaying her, and they had been bullying her into doing things of questionable ethics, and she was scared that she was going to lose her license to practice law because of the stuff they'd pushed her into doing. That's the kind of job that you miss out on if you ask if they could raise the salary a bit and they withdraw the offer. It's not really a loss. So it's really scary to do this, but the risks are ultimately very low, and it's incredibly, incredibly important. Even a small salary increase makes a huge difference over the course of your career. I mean, this is the classic example. A $5,000 salary increase. You're 25 years old, you get a job offer. You and your friend get the same exact job offer. Your friend negotiates it up and manages to get $5,000 more a year than you. Assuming you get the same 3% raise each year, and that's cost of living. That's really the lowest raise you should get each year. By the time you're 60, your friend has made more than $300,000 more than you over the course of their career. And that's only one small salary negotiation for a really minor difference at the beginning of your career with minimal cost of living raises, and assuming that you never switch jobs and get those really big salary increases that you get from a job change. Factor all that in and think of how much money that you could be missing out. I mean, that's really fucked up. This is like huge, huge, huge amounts of money for your retirement fund that you can miss out by just not daring to ask. That's all it comes down to. So you gotta ask. Risks are small. It's really important, but it's scary. How do you get more comfortable asking for things? Well, you practice. So this is not actually a law school lesson. My friend went to business school. She had this assignment in class, and she dragged me into doing it with her, where the assignment was you have to collect, I'm making up the numbers here, but it was something like 10 no's in the next month. You had to go out and ask for things and see if you could ask for things and have someone say no in response. And there were some few basic, hopefully obvious rules. You have to ask for things you actually want. You don't get to use this as an excuse to harass people. I mean, this doesn't mean you get to turn to the person next to you and be like, hey, let's go get naked with the chainsaw in my hotel room. Not cool. So this is not that game. If someone says no, you don't get to keep asking them again and again. This is not an excuse to harass people. It's actually a really great consent exercise because you get used to hearing a no and taking a no. And if you play it with other people, you get used to saying no, which is also really hard. So the idea of this exercise was go out, ask for things, see how many no's you can get, see what it takes to get a no, because it's really, really, really hard to get a no for anything. So I actually would really love it if you all would take this as an exercise going forward. Let's see how many no's you can get in like the next week. Go out and ask for things. You can start small. Hey, can I borrow a pen? Yeah, of course. Hey, I have this pull request I'm about to submit, but I'm kind of freaking out. Maybe I wrote something stupid. Would you do me a favor and give me a code review? Yeah, someone will probably say yes to that too. Hey, you want to pair on something? I mean, you can use this as an excuse to exercise all the stuff that other speakers have talked about earlier and see how far you have to go before someone says no to you. And actually, let's start a hashtag for this. I would really, really love to hear from you guys. How many no's can you get in the next week? What do you have to ask for before you can even get a no? I think you're going to have to ask for some really interesting things to even get there. So let's do this. I think this will be a really fun group exercise and really great practice for negotiations going forward. So we're going to practice this. We're going to get used to this idea. We're going to ask for things. But what should we ask for? Obviously, we want to ask for money. We know that. Let's be straightforward about it. But how much money do you ask for? Well, you have to do your research first. Ask everyone you know how much they earn. Yeah, no, you're all thinking, this is not cool. We are not asking people, gosh, how much do you make? I was really curious if you know or you are a better person than me. I understand that this is a really scary thing, especially because in our culture, talking about money is more taboo than talking about sex. I know more about what most of my friends like to do in bed than I do about what they earn. You probably do too. That's what we talk about. Money, that's a little weird. But it's incredibly important because silence benefits employers and it hurts you. If you don't know what the other people are making, you have no way of knowing if you're being underpaid. You have no way of knowing if you're being discriminated against. You have no way of knowing if years and years and years pass where you are not earning what you could be earning. And remember, we talked earlier about how that adds up over time. You could be missing out on, that nice house you would like to own when you're 80. You have to find out this information. The other big elephant in the room here is I know a lot of us have signed contracts that say we're not really allowed to talk about what we earn. So legal disclaimers, this is not legal advice, et cetera, but the National Labor Relations Act actually says that your employer cannot prohibit you from talking to your coworkers about how much you earn. I mean, look it up yourselves. Actually, please do look it up yourselves. This is not legal advice. But they can say you're not allowed to tell people outside the company, and they can say, you're not allowed to ask Bobby what Sue earns, but they're not allowed to say you can't tell each other what you earn, because you have to be able to communicate in order to unionize. Not that I'm going to say you all should go out and unionize necessarily. Maybe you should. The Free Software Foundation actually is unionized, which is kind of cool. It's the only software shop I know that is. But this is why you are absolutely allowed to talk to your coworkers about how much you earn. And I'm going to confess to you, I talk big, but I'm big wimp. And I really don't feel comfortable generally asking current coworkers how much they earn. So I deal with this by asking friends, by asking people I know, what's your level of experience? What kind of work are you doing? How much are you making? How much were you making in your last job? Because then, we don't have to talk about, how you feel about yourself right now. This is your last job. How much were you making then? You can ask former coworkers. You can ask everyone. When you're asking around, you want to be careful of one thing. You want to try to minimize selection bias. I understand this is a mixed group we're speaking to. This is not a talk for women specifically or anything, but for me, I'm standing here as a woman, and if I ask only other women how much they earn, I'm going to have a problem. Statistically speaking, women earn less than men. And if I ask a bunch of my female friends, how much do you earn, I'm going to get a very different number than if I ask a bunch of men and women how much they earn. I don't want to think this is what I'm worth. I want to think that I am worth the most privileged salary possible. That's the information you want to get. So don't just ask your little bubble of friends who are all like you. You need to ask a wide range of people. And there are other resources that you can look into. You all know about Glassdoor.com. It usually has information for even really small companies. If you're looking at a nonprofit, you can go to GuideStar and look at their 900 form, which will actually tell you the salary of their 5 highest paid employees every year, which is really interesting. You can ask recruiters. We get recruiter calls all the time. You can turn around on them and say, hey, you really do this more than I do. What do you think I could get in the current job market? And if you ask this of every recruiter who gets in touch with you, you're going to start getting a real sense of the lay of the land. You can ask on mailing lists. Just send out an email saying, hey, is anyone willing to talk to me about this off list? I'm thinking of asking for a raise, and I just really want to know what's reasonable nowadays. And people will answer you, or at least some of them. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so now that you've done your research, what do you do next? You're going to go into this conversation. What are you going to ask for? How are you going to ask for it? Well, you want to focus on asking for stuff that benefits you more than it costs them. Even money, you have to see this way. A raise has more value compared to what you earn than compared to what your company pays for you. You come into this thinking, okay, well, I earn this many dollars a year. And your company thinks, okay, well, we have to pay that salary. And then we have to pay Social Security contribution. And then we have to pay for HR and for health insurance and for, let's see, what else? Office space, equipment, all sorts of other stuff. And if we're talking about a raise, what's the cost of them for replacing you? We have to pay for recruiters. We have to pay for the time it takes to find someone. We have to pay for lower productivity for the time it takes for a new person to come up to speed. They are looking at any raise as a percentage of that amount of money, all the things they have to pay to keep you or to replace you. You're looking at it as a much larger percentage of a very smaller sum, your salary. Think of it from their perspective. If you say, look, you know, I want a 10% raise, you're talking about 10% of your salary, not 10% of your cost to them. And if they don't realize that, you can point it out to them. It means more to you than it does to them, which is a great place to be. And money, of course, isn't the only thing that matters. There's other stuff you might want. You might want vacation, flex time, freedom to work remotely. Maybe you want to work from home a few days a week, conference budgets, so you can go to wonderful events like this. If you're relocating, maybe they can help you find an apartment because they're local, it's easier for them. If you get health insurance through a spouse, maybe you can ask them to give you the money they would otherwise be contributing towards your health insurance because it's no more than they'd be paying for you anyway. There's all sorts of stuff that you can ask for. You can really get creative with this. And you want to ask for some throwaways. Sort of one of those classic things, but it really works. People really like to feel like they have their fingerprints on things. Put in some requests that you don't mind if they take out so you can get everything else you're asking for. This works even if it's ridiculous. So, like I said, I used to be a lawyer, and my dad is a lawyer and has been a lawyer all my life. And when I was a teenager, he would drag me to court with him. And I remember one time I was in court in chambers with him where he was talking to a judge, trying to figure out what would go into the order that the judge was about to sign. The judge says, oh, well, what do you want? And my dad said, well, they should have to pay this amount of money, and you should require them to do this, and tell them they can't do that, and also I think you should dip them in a vat of boiling oil. And the judge said, well, okay, Mr. Sucher, you can have all that except for the boiling oil. Like, okay, well, it works even if we're talking about boiling oil. That's kind of cool. So whatever, just put in some sort of throwaways. Let people have their hands on things. So what you're going to ask for. How do you ask? You want to create a connection with people. This next set of stuff, I have tons of studies that back it up, and I can put up a list of citations later on if you want. You want to use the word we, not I, you, them, but we. Creates a connection, and studies will show that if you do that, if you just do a little thing like use the word we in the conversation, you will get a better return out of the negotiation. I should probably be using this thing. You want to use similar language, similar words and phrases to what they're using. This matters especially if you do it early in the conversation. There was one really interesting study that was done in Thailand and then it was repeated in the US, which showed that if you use similar language in the first 10 minutes of the conversation, you actually get higher returns than if you use similar language in the last 10 minutes of the conversation. So it's not even just using similar language. Do it early on. You want to do that when you first walk into the room and start talking. You want to chat about things that you have in common. Studies back that up. That will get you better returns out of your negotiation. You want to mirror their body language. If they take a sip of their drink, you take a sip of your drink. If I cross my legs, you cross your legs. All of this stuff creates a sense of connection, and it leads to more dollars at the end. And I know this stuff sounds really awkward, and you don't want to think, gosh, I'm really doing all this weird manipulative stuff, and I don't go into negotiations really thinking consciously, I know I'm going to do all this stuff where I really repeat what they do. This is stuff that we do naturally when we feel comfortable. You do it without thinking all the time when you're in a comfortable situation talking to someone you like. We're monkeys. This is what we do. But a negotiation is a tense situation for a lot of us. It's scary. So if you get into the habit of doing these sort of things even when you're tense, it will calm you down, get you into the place where you're doing it naturally anyway. You're not doing anything weird that you wouldn't do otherwise. And you are talking to people who you want to work with, who you want to keep working with, who are your friends or are going to be your friends. And you're going to be doing this all the time. So it's perfectly normal. This is the monkey thing. So this is actually my favorite slide. I was trying to find a great picture to show you when talking about this mimicking, using similar language, mirroring things, and I discovered there was this marine animal called a mimic octopus. So that's our mascot for this. I want to be like the the mimic octopus. Mimic octopus is doing everything right. So that's it. So it's not just also verbal language and mirroring and mimicking, it's also there's other body language stuff. You want to make eye contact, you come across as more honest, more trustworthy. Better returns in your negotiation. Don't fidget. I'm making my hands waving all around, this is terrible. Actually, usually I tuck my hair behind my ears again and again and again. So if I do that, it's because I'm terrified of public speaking, and it's a thing, sorry. You want to sit up straight. It actually was a really cool study that showed that if you have good posture, it will actually make you feel more confident. And feeling more confident, again, lots of studies backing this up, will get you better returns out of your negotiation. Straighten up your spine, you will have a higher salary. Kind of funky, but it works. So here's a great example. This is a woman who has listened to about half of my talk. She's making terrible eye contact. She's fidgeting, her hands are all over her face, her shoulders are hunched. But look at the guy's arms and the woman's arms. They are in exactly the same position. She's mirroring his body language beautifully, and that's wonderful. That's what you want to be doing. So now we're going to go on. We've dealt with the body language and all the funky study-based stuff. How do you deal with when someone asks you to name a number? How do you avoid it? Well, maybe you shouldn't. In the first case, people have asked me about this. How do you deal with it when a recruiter says, what's your salary history? You don't really want to tell them your salary history because they're going to use this as a baseline for figuring out what you should earn now, and that's not really where you want them to start. You want to earn a lot more than you're earning now, obviously. So how do you get them to back off? Well, we can go back to your employment agreement. A lot of us have employment agreements that say we're not allowed to tell anyone else how much we make. Say, I'm sorry, I'm just not allowed to disclose this, and of course I respect my employment agreements. They can back off. You can say that your salary history doesn't represent the value you bring now. Maybe you were doing something different. Maybe you were working in a different industry. Maybe you were working in a nonprofit. Now you're looking at a for-profit company. Maybe it's just a different kind of work. It's not representative. It's not relevant. I'm not going to tell you because it's not meaningful here. Hey, let's talk about how awesome I am instead. And you can do my favorite thing, which is just be completely direct and say, I don't want to anchor you. I've read the studies. This is what I tell people. Because anchoring is the awesomest thing ever. Let's talk about anchoring. Anchoring is my favorite cognitive bias. I know other people have favorite colors and stuff. I have favorite cognitive biases. This is the one. It's the best. Anchoring is this really cool, horrifying, cool concept where any random number you hear can hijack your brain. So there was this study done in 1974, and there have been lots and lots of studies replicating it ever since. This is one of the really good confirmed ones. But the oldest one that I am aware of was First and Kahneman did a study in 1974, which talked about anchoring. What they did is they set up a wheel of fortune, and it was rigged. So it was only going to land on 10 or a 65. And each participant who came in, they had them roll the wheel of fortune, and after it landed, either the 10 or the 65, they asked them, what's the percentage of African nations in the UN? And the funny thing is, when the people who saw it land on the 10, their answer was usually around 25%. And the people who saw it land on the 65, their answer was usually around 45%. And these people did not somehow think that the number on the Wheel of Fortune had anything to do with the percentage of African nations in the UN. It's just that the number you hear anchors something, it's something that works in our brain. It becomes the baseline from which we adjust up or down. And numbers we deal with afterwards end up closer to that anchor than they otherwise would have been. This is a creepy thing about how our brain works, and also a really interesting one. So don't be afraid of being the first person to name a number. Everyone always says, oh, you really want them to make the offer first so you can see where they stand, and that's okay, I can see where that's coming from. But why don't you make the offer, name a number first, and anchor them really high. Anchoring works on our brains. You can use this. If you're scared of doing it in terms of salary and saying, I think you should pay me $2 million, but don't worry, I'll accept a competitive industry salary we can all agree on, which is usually actually how I do this. You can name it in a completely irrelevant way. You can be like, oh, my last project had, 600,000 page views in the past however long. Okay, that's a number. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. So let's say you do it the salary way, and you ask for something that is not, $2 million, but a little closer to reasonable, and they don't really like it so much. What if they think you ask for too much? I know this is one of the other big fears. Oh my God, this person is greedy and crazy, and they say, this is outrageous, of course we're not gonna pay you that much. We could get 3 developers for that price. Well, they expected you to ask for something, so you just shrug it off. You're like, oh, I had to ask. I'm really excited about this company though. What do you have in mind? Again, it doesn't matter. The anchor works anyway. And they are professionals. They expect you to ask, and it is totally okay to shrug off. I had to ask. Cool, we know that. Another funky thing about anchoring, it works even if you're aware of it. You now know about anchoring. You now know that there are studies. You now know that this is a thing about your brain. With a lot of cognitive biases, knowing is how, half the battle. It gets you out of it, and they don't work so well on you anymore. Anchoring isn't really one of those. I love anchoring. It's the best thing ever. It's really interesting. I've read a bunch of the studies, and if you try to use this on me, it will work. I will fall on this for it. Because this is how our brains work, which is kind of interesting. So don't worry that people will be aware of this and this will not work, or don't think, I am aware of this, now it won't work on me. Yeah, it will. So what do? What if they anchor you? What if they say, oh, you know, really, we're thinking of offering you this really low salary right now, and they name a number, and you're like, shit, they just anchored me low. This is terrible. How do you get out of this? Well, there was one study that said that it turns out if you shake your head while hearing the number, anchoring doesn't work as well, and if you nod while hearing the number, it works better on you. But obviously, you don't want to be sitting there shaking your head every time someone names a salary offer to you, because it's going to look like you have a tick, which would be a little weird. You don't really want to deal with that. So we had to find some other way out of this. And the way out is you really don't want to make a counteroffer at that point. You can't accept, okay, this is the anchor, you made me this offer, now make a counteroffer. We're just adjusting up from this offer. This is a huge mistake. You want to change the subject. You want to laugh at it. You want to be like, I'm sorry, that's really unrealistic. Let me tell you why. I've done all this really cool stuff. I'm super amazing. I'm brilliant. I'm really so cool that people, really great developers will want to come work at this company just to hang out with me. I am the best. And that's why I think this is, you know, what people in the industry doing this kind of work earn nowadays. So that's why I think that I want to be earning something more like this. New anchor, really fresh, because you had that really nice break in between. That might get you a little further. So that's the way I'd suggest approaching that. So you're naming numbers. How do you know if you're asking for enough? I mean, we don't know. You've done your research, so you have sort of a sense, but it's still pretty tricky. Well, back when I was lawyering, the way I dealt with this, my usual rule of thumb was I had an hourly rate, and when I was really completely comfortable telling people how much I charged, I knew it was time to raise it. That's all it really was. And I would raise it, and then I would be really a little bit uncomfortable again. I'd be like, I don't know, am I really worth this? I feel a little weird about this. And that was great. And when I felt comfortable, when I got used to it, and it was a really comfortable place again, it was time to raise my price again. You have to live on that edge of discomfort, or you are not charging enough. It's really important. You have to embrace that sensation of, I'm a little uncomfortable with this, and I don't know. Is it a little too high? Great, perfect. So what else should you look out for? People tend to say, oh, I used to be a lawyer. What's the lawyerly stuff I need to worry about here? Well, okay, let's talk about some clauses to watch out for. Assignment of inventions. This is the most important one as far as I'm concerned. This is the one where they say, well, we own any code that you write, even if you do it on the weekend, on your own computer, and it's in another language and has nothing to do with the industry that we work in. Yeah, that one really bothers me. You want to read that one pretty carefully. Best efforts clause. That's the one that says you can't do any other work during the term of your employment here. If someone offers you, a little freelance gig you could do in a day and get a bit of extra cash, you can't do that. Be aware of that. That's another one to read carefully. The non-competes, you're probably all aware of. That's the one that says even after you leave this company, maybe you can't work in the same industry for a while afterwards. Maybe that limits your career options going forward. That's pretty scary stuff. Non-solicitation. That's the one that says maybe you leave this company, you go take a new job and you love it, and you really want your friends who you used to work with to come work with you again because they were awesome. You're not allowed to say, hey, I'm working at this really cool place, you should come join me here. That's solicitation. This is a problem. So that's another clause to be aware of and to look out for. And non-disclosure, which I'm sure that you're all aware of, this is another one that really bothers me. Facebook in New York actually has these board game parties for female engineers. I tried to go to one once, and they asked me to sign an NDA just to go in, and I refused because I am not going to sign an NDA to play fucking Scrabble. That is not happening. Sorry. And they would not let me in, so fine, I left because I can play Scrabble in a cafe and not sign an NDA, and that's okay. And it turns out that Google's office in New York is very different. There I walk in, and they ask me, will you sign our NDA? And I say no, and they say, okay, and let you in anyway. It's really cool. So this stuff really varies. So don't feel like you're trapped and there's an industry standard with NDAs, because there isn't. It varies. So that's the stuff to look out for, stuff you may want to bargain about. How do you deal with that? Well, collaborative bargaining. You really want to find a win-win situation, because zero-sum games really suck. Zero-sum games is when you have a winner and a loser, and you can't both get what you want here. This is a terrible framework. These are people you want to work with. You want everyone to be happy. Isn't that nice? We want everyone to be happy. But this is a problem. When you start out with this framework where I want X and they want not X, and that's not happening at the same time. This is really a problem here. How do we break out of that when you're really stuck? I want this, and they want exactly the opposite of this. Fuck. Well, we do that by focusing on interests, not positions. What do I mean by that? Well, let's go back to the assignment of inventions, which is really the one that's near and dear to my heart. Let's say they have one of these really broad clauses, a lot of places do, where they want to own all the code you do on your weekend, on your own computer, doesn't matter if it's related. Fucking hell, no. What do I really care about? I want to be able to contribute back to open source. I want to know that if I'm having one of these weird insomniac nights and it's 2 in the morning and I see an open issue, I have the right to fix it and submit a pull request. That's what matters to me. I don't really care if I can run a side business. I don't really care about writing proprietary code. I want to contribute back to open source. And you may have other interests, but for me, this is the one. Okay. That's what I do. I think about this and I realize this is what it comes down to for me. And then I need to figure out what do they really care about. And you ask them, what are your real concerns here? I see that you have this broad IP clause, and it's really important to me to be able to contribute back to open source, but I really want to respect your concerns. What are your concerns here? What matters to you here? And see what they say. I mean, they might actually say something you can work with. First, a caveat, you really don't want to have this conversation over email. All this intonation stuff and speech stuff and body language stuff we talked about earlier is really critically important for these conversations. So if you can't make an appointment to go in, pick up the phone to talk about this. Call them, say, hey, I had a concern about this particular clause. I really want to know what you were thinking, what matters to you here, so we can come to an agreement that works for both of us. And you have to listen. This is the active listening thing, where you actually pay attention to what they say and don't just think about what you're going to say next. And then you rephrase it, you repeat it back to them, and you say, hey, it's my understanding that this is what you're saying. Am I getting it right? Am I missing anything? This is actually what the FBI teaches hostage negotiators to do as their first step. If it's good enough for the hostage negotiators, I think it's good enough for you trying to get your next job and your salary. That's going to work out. So, IP example, maybe they'll say something like, we used to have this guy working for us, and he had this side business. He started a whole startup while working here and didn't pay attention to his work for us for months, and we just didn't even know what was going on, and we were totally blindsided. It was terrible. Well, okay, that's a reasonable concern. You can acknowledge that. You can say, look, that's a totally reasonable concern. I can see why you wouldn't want an employee getting distracted and surprising you by not paying attention to their work for a long time. Fine. I mean, you want to give them what they want. These are people you want to work with. You want them to be happy. You want yourself to be happy also, but you want them to be happy. So you have to brainstorm solutions that address your concerns and their concerns. In this IP example, maybe the answer is you say, okay, well, why don't we limit the IP clause and say that you only own the code that I write at work or that really directly relates to the work that I'm doing, but I will also happily agree to tell you about every bit of other code that I write within, I don't know, a week, 2 days, whatever it is. I don't even care about the period. So you will never be surprised. You're going to know what's going on. You don't have the risk of me starting a startup and you don't even find out for months and I've been fucking up ever since. Does that work for you? I mean, it solves my concern. I think it might solve your concern. What do you think? Yeah, maybe it does. Or maybe you can find some other solution that really does work for everyone and solve all the real concerns that they have and sort of sidesteps the stated issues. And once you've done that, you really want to make it easy for them to give you what you want. This is really the fundamental thing. Water flows downhill. You make it easy for people. In this example, once you've had the conversation, they say, yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable. Your next line is, can I send you some proposed language? You want to write it out. Send them the language. Here's a nice thing you can copy paste into this contract. You don't have to find someone else to write it for you. You don't have to think about how to phrase it. I've made it easier for you. Copy, paste. This has the additional side benefit of you have phrased it exactly the way you want it phrased, and the burden is now on them to try to change it if they want to, and that's a little trickier. So bonus in a few ways. You also want to do research for them. If we're talking about something where you really want to refer to, normal industry salaries for the kind of work you're doing, you should do the research. Have the numbers ready. Have the sources and the citations ready. Show it to them. Make it easy for them to say, that's a lot of information. Okay, cool, I got that. And I don't really need to even look into it much anymore. I just need to verify that you're not making this up, which is much easier than doing research from scratch. All right, so that's another way. Also, if you're dealing with someone who is not the ultimate authority in the company, which you probably are, you really want to give them something they can use to justify the deal to the supervisor. Let's say you've had this great negotiation, you've been talking to this hiring manager, a wonderful time, and you've really come to an agreement that works for you, and works for both of you, and it's awesome. And they're going to give you, 10% more than they'd normally give someone who's coming in at your level of seniority, and you're going to get an extra week of vacation, and whatever else that you happen to have negotiated for. And they're thinking, I really just need to get a sign off from my boss, and they're going to think there's something a little, how do I explain this to them that I'm giving you so damn much? You really want to have some nice sound bites for them, some nice numbers for them. Give them something that they can really easily show their boss and say, we're giving her more, and she deserves it, and this is why. Make it easy for them to do their job when their job is helping you. Actually, this is amazing because I'm not going over. I was really panicking starting this talk that it was going to be an hour and a half long because it was when I practiced it, and I cut out tons and tons and tons of stuff, and I freaked out on Twitter, and I was like, shit, this is never going to happen. I will never fit this into 30 minutes. And a friend of mine, who's this awesome guy, actually, you should all follow him, said that I should just reduce it to haiku. So that's what I did. Don't be scared to ask, what are your real concerns here? Carve an easy path. So those are your takeaways. That's my haiku. And here's your hashtag and my contact info. have like 40 seconds left, so does anyone have any questions? And so your hand first.
Do you recommend, since not all of us have legal backgrounds, to have a lawyer take a quick look at employee agreements before you sign them, or do you kind of think you can muddle through them?
Realistically, you're smart people. This is not, a really complex contract. You probably can get through it. I'm probably not supposed to tell you that. You probably can. If you have a lawyer buddy who's willing to glance at, that's fine. If you go to a lawyer who's not a friend, they're going to charge you for it because they're going to know there's no repeat business coming out of this. And, it might be worth it. But mostly the lawyer's going to tell you, hey, you should ask for more, and also keep in mind that they are asking you to do all these things that you may not have noticed. If you really go into thinking, here are some things I really need to pay attention to, and I really need to think about these things, you're probably going to be okay. There you go.
When you're, we have annual reviews, annual increases, so when you're at that first or subsequent increase time, what's your best one-liner for, oh, that's a nice cost of living adjustment, now let's talk about, why I'm going to stay here for another year?
Well, that's the one where we go back to you don't want them to anchor you based on your current salary. You really need to break out. So before, you have these things arranged in advance. You know when you're going to have this conversation, at least approximately, right? So you're going to do your research before you ever go in. And when you go in, I don't know that I have a one-liner, but you really want to say, hey, this is really the salary in the industry nowadays, and I've been doing a lot more work in the past year. I've really gotten a lot more responsibilities. Here are these amazing things that I've done, 1, 2, 3, my best, absolute most amazing bullet points. The industry has changed. I really could be earning, I haven't looked elsewhere. I really don't want to leave this company. I really love it here, but I really need to take care of my family. This is about what I should be making nowadays. How close can we get to that?
So hijack quick.
Hijack quick, yes. And also the, connect, I love it here, it's a wonderful place to be, etc. Make that connection and hijack quick.
Okay.
Anyone else? Yeah?
So, you said suggest some language for editing a contract or something. Also, not being a professional lawyer, similar to the first question, how do you come up with that suggested language in a way that makes sense in the context of a legally binding contract?
That's a really good question. If it's the sort of thing where there's just stuff you really want to cross out, that's really easy. You just set back the edited clause with the stuff crossed out. That's wonderful. A lot of it is, you'll see like innovations, assignment of innovations. There's right people saying you'll see innovations defined in multiple places in the contract, which is so freaking annoying. You'd be like, look, I refactored your contract for you. Now it's only defined in one place. That's great. But if it's something where you really want to add something in that's a little more complicated, it's coming from the person from the lawyer, that's probably a little trickier for me to answer, but I would think that you can just do it in plain English and trust that either they're not lawyers also, and if it's really clear, make it as clear and specific and not ambiguous as you could possibly do, and they're not lawyers either, it's probably just going to be okay. They're not going to take you to court. People almost never take you to court. If they go to a lawyer, then a lawyer will tell them not to take you to court. That's most of what I do as a lawyer, telling people, please don't go to court, it's a huge mistake. So, never worry too much. Or if they do actually have a lawyer that they're going to send it by, the lawyer will be like, oh, okay, I see what they're getting at. Let me rephrase it legally, so then you can send it back to them to look at. So there's always that fallback. Not too bad.
So like with software license, there's the easy cut and paste option. Do you want the MIT license, the GPU, that sort of,
GPL, yeah.
GPL, that sort of thing. It would really be great if there was just kind of a few different options to like kind of cut and paste into those few sections. I don't know if that's like a legal resource that could or should be online somewhere.
That's a really good idea. I feel like it's probably out there, but I haven't looked around to find a good one. If I happen to find a good one, I will totally tweet out the link with the BTV Ruby hashtag, but I think I promise to split it with the
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
How do you feel about plain text contracts, like not the legalese?
I have a strong preference, but okay, so legalese is stupid. It is archaic. It comes back let's see, legally started in the year 1066 when the French invaded Anglo-Saxon Europe, and they were like, okay, we know French, and we know English, and we know Latin, and everyone coming to court is going to know one of these, so let's write everything out in French, English, and Latin. Awesome, everyone's covered. And we still do that. We use a word that has the French root, and the English root, and the Latin root, because that's what happened. There was an invasion in 1066. This is idiotic. We all speak English, it's really okay, and you can rewrite it in the right appropriate language for whoever you're dealing with if you have to. So I really like plain English. Someone in the third back, how about you?
I know that in a lot of other countries, salaries aren't discussed as an annual salary, but as a monthly salary. And I wonder whether you think that might be a negotiating tactic, talking about the salary as a lower number, as a monthly cost, or you think it might just be too confusing?
That's actually a really interesting concept, because I do think in a lot of other contexts, it's helpful to change the framework so you can change the numbers. I think that in terms of salary in the US, that would probably confuse people a lot, and I would be very hesitant to do it. But I've used that sort of thing when talking about, say, time to work in open source during work. You know, have a conversation where your boss is like, 20% time sounds like a lot. And I'll be like, oh, well, 20% time is 1 day a week. That's what I can wrap my head around. It's only 1 day a week. It still doesn't sound like much. How about 1 day every other week? Oh, that sounds doable. We can handle that. That's only 2 days a month. So that's the sort of area where you can use that kind of trick. But I think it would be too confusing, honestly.
So I feel like I did a lot of these things when I negotiated last time. I feel good about that.
Awesome.
But one of the things I didn't realize was that there's things that should probably have gone into my contract that didn't. I'm wondering what kind of things you typically want to see written right into your contract, like working remotely or what kind of equipment you use, or I'm just wondering if there's other stuff like that that typically goes in there.
I mean, that sort of stuff I don't think you generally even see in a written contract. I mean, if they pull that out from under you, you leave the job and you go somewhere else because they're a bunch of lying jerks, and who wants to work for a bunch of lying jerks? I think the sort of putting really, really extra detailed stuff in a contract is more important with freelance contracts.
Okay.
Because with freelance contracts, you do a bunch of work, someone doesn't pay you, it's not like you're switching jobs, you're now owed money because you don't have a regular salary exactly, and you're not gonna take them to court because that's gonna be a huge, expensive, depressing experience that you really just don't want to do in your life. So that's more the context where I really worry about putting much more detail in.
Okay, so generally speaking, people are not like, so I wanted in my contract that I get a laptop, et cetera.
Not really. I mean, I'm sure some people do it, but it's not something I've really seen that much of.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? I don't even know who put their hand, but I spoke to you already, so how about you?
I was just wondering if you could comment about negotiating with the hiring manager versus the HR person or the CEO.
Well, if you are speaking with someone who is not the ultimate authority, it is much easier for they're in a better position, honestly, because they can always say, I'm sorry, my hands are tied. It's company policy. I don't have the authority to do this for you. Sorry. And that's really hard to argue against. That's really tricky. If you're talking to the person with the most power, they also have the most power to help you and the most power to change things. Which is also actually a thing you can use on your own behalf. If you're going through a recruiter, you can ask the recruiter to do the negotiation for you and ask for more money, because then their hands are tied. I'm sorry, I can't agree to that without speaking to my client. Whoops. So that's really the big difference. You actually had a...
Yeah, I was just gonna, there's a lot of negotiation when you're doing full-time employment that are I want a laptop, I want conferences, that don't get written into the contract.
Right.
That are a professional agreement between you and your hiring manager. And you want to be aware of your ability to leverage those, but also be aware that if your hiring manager goes away, those generally go with that relationship.
That's true.
But
So-
make the most of them anyway.
Right. They're a little more nebulous, and they may go away if things change. That's absolutely true. I mean, there's a upside too. It means you can often, if you forget to say, hey, I want a conference budget before you start the job, you can ask for it after. I mean, my last job that happened, I totally forgot to ask in advance. I talked about it after, and they're like, well, we did have a conference budget, but that's a really good idea. Let's have a conference budget for everyone. And okay, that was fine. So nebulous for good and for bad.
Just a quick note, because I've had a couple employees that I've hired who've done this to me. You write it into your employee acceptance letter, or your agreement acceptance letter, accepting based on these terms, and have those in there. It's just a smooth place to kind of write in, I'm working on a Mac, I get a laptop to take home, I get this conference budget. Like, it's just kind of another spot you can stuff something, and then if the hiring manager leaves, it gives you that negotiation sort of leverage.
You see, I actually don't really like that tactic. I think there's something a little skeezy about writing something without actually having a conversation about it. And I think we were talking about negotiations where you want a good working relationship going forward, and if you pull down someone, they feel kind of gross about it, and you don't want that. You want to be able to have the conversation directly. And I guess in a sense it can give you leverage. If this were ever a contract you were trying to enforce, yes, it would be legally enforceable if it was written down, but you're not going to a court to enforce it. It's basically meaningless in that sense.
So in our case, we didn't want to write it into the actual employee, or the
Okay.
actual contract, and that was just kind of a place within the stuff it, so that they knew they asked for it, we knew they asked for it, we all agreed on it, it was written down, so they felt safe.
Oh, okay, I think I misunderstood you. I think I thought you were saying that
It
they
was
wrote in
slightly-
afterwards, not that you would both agree that that was a reasonable place to write it. Yes, okay, that makes perfect sense the way you're actually saying it.
Should you be wary of a company that doesn't ask you to sign anything? Says, here, just come see you on Monday.
That's a really good question.
Probably.
Is that normal?
And they don't have any obligation to pay you, right?
Well, no, a verbal agreement is still a contract.
Okay.
And if you send emails back and forth, that's a written agreement,
Yeah.
still a contract. So in terms of, being covered legally speaking, if you've had a few emails where you're talking about it, I really wouldn't worry about them having an obligation to pay you. But it'd be a little strange, so I want to know, figure out why, just because when things are a little strange, you want to know whether it's coming from a good, healthy place or not so much. That's it.
When you mentioned working on open source projects, like that's probably the most common violation of that like overarching IP clause that everybody has signed without reading. And whenever I have a freelance contract, I'm a little paranoid about that, so I have a standard open source clause that
Nice.
basically says, notwithstanding the other clauses about violating company confidential information, I'm gonna be working on open source projects, deal with it.
Very nice.
Right, and I'm wondering how common that is, if I'm the only paranoid one in the room, if anyone else has done something similar.
You should open source that.
I will.
You sound fabulously paranoid. Please send it over. I might add it to my slides.
To that point, I had specific, didn't include open source, but I made sure to include exceptions for any charity. So which open source could be considered a charity, but also helping out with local communities and developing,
Very nice.
shelters.
We should get a collection of these clauses that people are inserting. If you guys want to send it to me, I'll put together a collection and tweet out the link so it's all in one place for people to refer to. That'd be pretty awesome. There you go.
I was wondering how common it is to talk about sort of negotiating if it doesn't work out. Like, is it common to say, okay, I want 2 months' salary if this doesn't work out? Or whatever people
Are we
talk
talking about a full-time job
Mhm.
backup thing? I do know, I have one friend who I know when he hires people, he actually does put a clause where he lays out in advance what the severance is going to be or what it's going to be if it doesn't work out. And he's the only person I've ever encountered who actually does that. So I know it happens ever. I don't think it happens terribly often.
Okay.
I think so, if you're laid off or something, you have to negotiate your severance at the time, which is one of the slides that I pulled out because I was scared of running out of time. So there's my one lesson on severance. Actually negotiate for it. It's not a present. They are buying something from you. They are buying you saying, I'm not going to sue you. And you saying, yeah, I'm really going to show up if someone else sues you and I'll testify on your behalf. And all sorts of other stuff. So it is an agreement. It's not a present. You should ask for more. There's my severance lesson.
I have a quick question.
Do I have time for one more?
Yeah, totally.
Oh,
Okay.
sure,
You might just
sorry.
tackle me. I had to ask.
All right, if you want to end, I can ask you privately.
No, you can ask over.
And
It's okay.
Glassdoor's salaries that companies publish, are they normally accurate? I mean, if HP says, we're publishing new salaries, it would be in their best interest to publish them low, and there's also geographical differences.
I mean, I generally look at the ones that former employees have posted along with their reviews, not the ones that the companies have published, which is still, may or may not be relevant to you, honestly, so you shouldn't only look there, but every source of information is good. You want more information rather than less. Okay, thank you.